Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to walk you through a sample application that you can now build with the skills you now have. In this case, it's a recipe management application, and I think it would be a great use of your time to actually work through the process of building this application out. Everything included in the application is stuff that you can do with the skills you now have. So let's go ahead and break down exactly what this application does. This recipe management application allows you to manage your recipes. Each recipe includes instructions for how to cook it and a list of ingredients needed to actually cook the recipe. What we're seeing here is the home page, and the home page for the recipe app looks pretty similar to the home page for the Notes application. Up above, I have a search bar. This is going to let me filter the list of recipes by title, the title for this one being homemade vegetarian chili, and the title down below being spicy jambalaya. Down below the search bar, we have a recipe card for each recipe. The recipe card is clickable. We'll talk about exactly what happens when you click it in a little bit. And the card is made up of the recipe title and a summary of how many ingredients you have for the recipe. In this case, we have all of the ingredients for the vegetarian chili. For the spicy jambalaya, we have some of the ingredients. And for the tostadas, we have none of the ingredients. Down below the recipe cards, we have a button to add a new recipe, much like we have a button to add a new note in the Notes application. Now, this is just the home page. There is also a separate page for actually working with the individual recipe, and we can view that by clicking over to the recipe page for spicy jambalaya. Now, the first thing we're going to notice is the URL for the page. You'll notice we're on a separate HTML page, and inside of the URL hash, we also have the recipe ID, which is what allows us to populate all of the things down below. The first thing on this page is an input that stores the recipe title. This is where we can view and change the title for the recipe. Down below that, we have a text area. This is where we can read the instructions for how to cook it or modify the instructions to fit our needs. Down below the instructions, we have a list of ingredients. And this is like an entire little to-do application for each individual recipe. I have individual ingredients like rice and olive oil. We either have them by checking it or we don't have them by having an unchecked box. And on the right-hand side, we have a little button allowing us to remove the ingredient altogether. Down below that, we have a way to add the ingredient into the recipe, allowing us to add in things like diced tomatoes or shrimp. The last thing on the page is the delete recipe button, which would just delete this recipe and send us back to the home page. Before we go, I want to give you a quick hint on the data structure for this one. For both the Notes and To-Dos applications, we had an array of objects where the individual object represented the individual item, whether it was an individual to-do or an individual note. The same is true with the recipe application. You're going to have an array of objects where each object represents a recipe. The recipe object is going to have a property for the ID. It's going to have a property for the title and the instructions, both stored as strings. On this object, though, we're going to need another array of objects for the ingredients. For this nested array, each object is going to be an individual ingredient with two fields: the text for that ingredient, like rice, and a Boolean representing whether or not it is an ingredient that we currently have. In this case, we don't have rice, diced tomatoes, or shrimp, but we do indeed have olive oil. So that is just a quick hint on the data structure for this application. If you have any questions or you run into any issues while building this out, go ahead and crack open a question in the Q&A for this one. If you go through the process of building this, also take a moment to deploy it live to the web and then share your work with others. If you decide to add any other new interesting features, go ahead and point those out as well. I know myself and others would love to see what you end up building. If you can, share a zip of your project code, as well as a live link to where we can play around with what you've built. All right, that is it for this video. You now have an idea of what you can go off and build. I highly recommend actually going off and building this recipe management app. It's going to be great practice setting you up for success down the line. All right, I'll see you in the next one.